Welcome to the business of NIL. My name is Ahmed, and today we have a very interesting episode. Our episode today is with Mr. Dan Lust. Dan's got a very decorated career. He's one of the voices on multiple media outlets. He's always voicing his concerns for the betterment of the industry, especially when it comes to NIL and sports in general. Dan has previous experience working with teams in the NFL, MLB, and many others, just to name a few actually. So today's episode will be an action-packed one. We'll be touching base on the current situation in sports, especially with Barstool getting involved with college athletes, the ins and outs, the legalities involved. So Dan's actually joined us. Let's bring him on. Dan, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. How's things?
Things are good. You're going to get a cameo, at least one from my dog, who's very barky tonight, but
That's all right.
She's good.
That's it's part of life. Working at home, babies, dogs, family, they're all popping up.
Very accurate. Very accurate.
Absolutely. So Dan, before we get into things, why don't you tell the audience a bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So I'm based in New York. I been a lawyer for about 8 years, going on my 8th year this year. So my background is a little bit in sports, a little bit in law. While I was in college, before going to law school, I worked for an NFL team, the New York Football Giants, for 2 years. And then while I was in law school, I worked part-time again for this football team. And so I worked about 4 years on and off in this New York Giants public relations department. And then while I was at school, I was very involved in what we call a sports law society. So it's a collection of law students that are interested in sports and sports type cases. So I worked for a baseball agency. I had a lot of fun jobs that were sports, but not really paid jobs, kind of internships and kind of like. So next probably 5 years, I worked as a pure trial lawyer, just handling normal cases, high profile cases, high leverage cases. Yeah, I didn't really do anything with respect to sports my first 5 years out of practice. And then really for the last 2.5, 3, I've been kind of in this intersection of sports, law, and media. I go on ESPN, Fox Sports. Anytime there's a legal story that has anything, or anytime there's a sports story with a legal component to it, then, I kind of tend to get called in to give my opinion, give my analysis. So, we have a podcast, Conduct Detrimental. We have a website, conductdetrimental.com. So now we have a bunch of, the sports law community that likes to contribute. So we're in that space. And then, for NIL purposes for today, I've spoken to a couple schools. I've given my thoughts on different state rules, federal rules, but it's all kind of in the sports law realm. I've been following and tracking NIL since late 2019. When California passed their first rule. So I've been on the scent for a while. I've watched it kind of evolve. I've watched it evolve since July 1st. But it's all kind of, what I do on my day-to-day grind.
Very nice. So one of the big conversations in the world of NIL that hit many by surprise was the entrance of Barstool into the world of NIL and college athletes. I mean, nothing against them personally, but because they're owned by a gambling company, they have a sports book themselves. So there's been a lot of questions about how is it possible that they get involved, so on and so on. Can you touch a bit up on their involvement, the students that are with them, because I think there's a bit of confusion at the moment.
The confusion is consistent at this collegiate level as well. It's not just you and I. I spoke to a school which shall remain nameless last week and essentially said, we don't think it's okay, but Barstool athletes represent about 1/3 of the entire student body, student athletes across the country. So it's about 450,000 student athletes across D1 and D3, and just over 150,000 have registered to be a Barstool athlete. So what are you going to do? You're just going to eliminate 1/3 of all athletes on all of your teams? Like, you can't really do that. So the school I spoke to said they did a very smart thing getting in there so quick before there could be any type of guidance. So, here's really where the Barstool stuff lies. And, Barstool is an interesting company. They're obviously probably majority a media company, a sports media company, but a non-insignificant portion of the company involves gambling-related content and, to some extent, alcohol-related content. So why is that important? Not that I have anything or gambling or anything like that, or alcohol. The issue is more that these schools do not want, they don't want these athletes to be partnering with what they call sin companies. So it's alcohol, gambling, cannabis, and Barstool checks 2 of those boxes. They're owned by a company called Penn National Gaming, which, is a mega casino. So there's some gambling to that. There's also a sports book called Barstool Sportsbook. And they have a beer component of the brand called, there's a guy, Dana Beers, who goes around and he shotguns beers, does this whole thing. So all I know is that schools either think they check 1 or 2 of those boxes. Now, what they are going to do with it is a separate story, but by no means is this conversation over. There are some schools that are going to undoubtedly say, no, we don't want you to work with Barstool. One has already done that. But yeah, other than that, I think it's just this one school in Massachusetts that has actually said, we don't want you to work with Barstool. But yeah, I think other schools are just kind of waiting to make that finding.
Yeah, but don't you think this opens up the doors for other companies to come and play similar plays and, have a similar tactic and on board? Because at the end of the day, the student athlete is going to go with the brand that's going to potentially make them the most money, put them in front of the biggest brands. So isn't this opening up a can of worms?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is a can of worms. I mean, honestly, there's no way around it, right? There are people in the space that when the state laws were passed, you wouldn't think they'd be able to get in. Like, if you said, take a guess, is Barstool going to be allowed to do deals with athletes? I'd say no, because they're a gambling company. But they found their way in because there's an issue, and you'll see what I'm getting at. I kind of hit into it, Barstool. There's an issue of enforcement. What school wants to be the school to be like, I don't know if you're like, people made fun of the NFL for many years, the National Football League. They used to call them the No Fun League because they would penalize people for doing touchdown dances or anything under the sun. I don't know what school is going to be the school that tells on themselves, right? That says, oh, you guys can't do a deal with Barstool, because all of these different NIL rules have turned into recruiting advantages, right? So like, if one school is going to be the one saying you can't do deals with Barstool, then if an athlete's picking between a potential school where he could be a Barstool athlete and one that he can't be, maybe he picks the other school. So there's an issue with interpretation, and enforcement. I'm not wrong. Barstool is much closer to a gambling company than not a gambling company, but I don't know what school is going to be the one to enforce it. Just like, the schools I've spoken to, and I've spoken to people dealing with some of the federal bills. I think it's an issue of schools doing the enforcement, because the NCAA has waved their hands with it. They've washed their hands. They don't want to deal with any type of punishment. They don't want to deal with any of the vetting process. So it's like, the school's really going to police themselves here. So, Barstool kind of coming in. I know there are companies that resemble OnlyFans, like that amateur porn site, whatever you want to call it. They want to get in. And I'm like, I don't know who's going to say something, right? Like, I'd hope that somebody would, but these schools are very slow to put their foot down, at least so far.
Yeah, and let's make something clear. I love Barstool Sports and their content and whatnot, especially their pizza reviews. But anyway, so
I do too.
But
I know Barstool well enough to tell you that it's a gambling company. I listen to all the podcasts.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the confusing part, because now, like you said before, so how does the student know whether a brand is permissible or not? What standard is set? So let's say an alcohol company comes and offers a student athlete a ton of money. He takes it back to compliance and going to say, oh, no, you can't work with an alcohol company. And he's going to say, oh, but, how come these guys working with this? So it just causes so much confusion. Like, how do you even stop that now?
I mean, there are some schools, and I want to say the majority of states, majority of schools require the deal to be checked and vetted in some sense.
Yeah.
So you got to know you can't do a deal with Heineken. That's pretty straightforward. But like then again, right? There's someone's going to make this argument because they're doing it with Barstool. They're like, well, Barstool, they have some gambling components, but they also have some non-gambling components. And if you're advertising the non-gambling side, it's fine. And I'm like, I don't know, isn't all the money kind of tied together? Isn't the revenue from Barstool's gambling going to this other side? And so it's like, here's a crazy example. I'm going to take a shot. Are you from Australia? It's a good guess, right?
Yeah, originally, yeah.
So like Foster's Australian for beer, right? That's one of my favorite commercials. I don't know this for a fact, but let's say Foster's, they said, you know what? We're going to open up a bread component to our business. So we're going to sell beer, we're going to sell bread, and we're going to be like, you know what? We're going to get some Foster's athletes to sponsor the bread, Foster's bread. I'm like, still a beer company. You haven't really tricked me, but that's the slippery slope that you've created with Barstool. Because it's like, I don't, if something else is something else that's not gambling, I guess that makes it not gambling. So there's DraftKings, and if you could somehow get away for DraftKings or Caesars Resorts Casino, oh, they have pools and a club area. I'm like, maybe they can sponsor that. I'm like, well, I think it's mainly a casino, but yeah, it's definitely a slippery slope, and no one wants to draw the line because everyone's just really scared to do it.
Absolutely. All right, awesome. So let's have a look at the actual deal process. Now, obviously, every deal has to be submitted through to compliance officers and whatnot. But how does the student avoid the headaches before they even reach all the time and effort that they go through and then go to compliance and get the no? What are your thoughts on that? Other than all this, yeah, a good deal done without getting caught with themselves in trouble.
I mean, here's the thing. I think what we've seen, there's probably 3 levels of athletes that are getting deals. It's like the football players, basketball players, and then there's maybe 4. Maybe the best athlete on a lower non-revenue generating team like golf or tennis, maybe the best on that team. And then the last category is just like social media influencers, we'll say. So for those 4 categories, for the most part, they're being approached. It's not the opposite. Like there's legitimate companies, maybe some illegitimate companies, but they're approaching those athletes. So they get a deal. They walk it over to compliance. Like some of the schools have like a 7-day turnaround. Other ones have like a 10-day turnaround. And you just say, here's the deal. I haven't signed the contract. Here's the proposal. I'm not signing anything to lock myself in. Best practices. There's some deals that no one's going to read the fine print, but as lawyers we do. There's some buzzwords that pop off to me, like in perpetuity. If the deal's locking someone in for essentially for the duration of their college career. I don't really love those. I will say this: most states, not all schools are going to have this. Most schools will invalidate, or most state laws invalidate any contract that goes beyond graduation. So they're supposed to automatically expire by the time that you graduate. So I don't know. Do you want to sign up for a 4-year deal, or do you want to sign up for like a 1-year deal? So I mean, that's the short answer to your question. We can kind of get into the fun kind of brands and stuff, but like, you get a deal. I would not sign the deal. I would present it the exact same terms, just like any type of lawyer would tell you. There's offer and acceptance. You get the offer, you get the paperwork, and you don't have to accept it, but you just take it to compliance. Say, is this thing okay, right? Is there going to be a conflict with the school? Do you have potentially a sponsorship as the school that's going to conflict with the one that I'm trying to do? So, yeah, I mean, a couple different levels to it, but that's at least the initial checkpoint. And then there's why would you sign certain deals, but we can go one by one.
Yeah, absolutely. One last question for you is, those companies that are then paying the student athlete for a service, then taking that data and reselling and reselling and selling and selling, and they're making a monetary gain from the sale of that data. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, where does that fall? Is that is that considered as fair? Is that considered as, I don't know. It's just a bit fishy in my opinion.
What, that companies can be a broker in the middle?
Yeah, I mean they'll pay you a fee to let's say join their platform, but then the data that you present on their platform will be taken and sold, and it's yours. It's basically your data. So have you heard of any cases? Is there anything that they can learn about or maybe prevent themselves from doing so from the get-go? Because what's happening is they're seeing the money and they're not looking past that.
Well, I mean, there's a company that we spent a lot of time analyzing on our show, Conduct Detrimental. It's a company called Yoke Gaming, which I don't know what Yoke Gaming is other than I saw their contract. And there are some deals that say, hey, in order to sign with us, you have to sign an exclusive deal. So people don't read it. Maybe they'll get like $100 up front or $200 up front, and they've given up way more on the back end. So congrats, you signed your first deal. I have a deal with Yoke Gaming. Like, congrats. Maybe, this is kind of the interesting part. Like, there's some huge brands that, like, I don't know. I haven't seen a single A-list brand to touch the space yet. Like Coca-Cola, Home Depot, McDonald's. Like, I don't know. So what are you messing around with Yoke Gaming? Like, the big brands are waiting to see what this comes out to. They're waiting to see what market power is and what these guys are going to sign for. And I don't know. Like, I don't think I think the deals that are here today are going to be there in a month. I don't think there's some gold rush, but yeah, I find a little bit problematic. Like the brands that are like immediately walking over to, they're like, hey, sign up with us right now. Like there's this one over in Miami. Have you followed that deal that all the UFC gym guys are getting?
Yeah, I've been looking at it. Yeah,
Yeah, it's just an interesting deal. I mean, there's no exclusivity to it, but like you sign up to be a Miami Hurricane football player, and automatically you get $500 in your pocket. Like, sounds pretty good. I mean, maybe we'll read the fine print at some point and we'll kind of vet it. But like, sounds pretty good until you realize that like the fundamental purpose of these state laws was to avoid a pay-for-play scenario. That like by signing up with Miami, all of a sudden you could just get $5,000. Like, I don't know. It's a good. I mean, I give a lot of credit to the schools in Florida for getting ahead of this, but I just think states are getting very clear advantages based on their politicians and the savviness of their lawyers, which is like that never was meant to be college recruiting. But credit to Florida, they did a good job. I give them a ton of credit.
yeah. So, what are your thoughts on group licensing and that whole approach? I mean, that seems to be the new trend now.
It is. I was speaking to, I won't say the school, but I was speaking to some offensive linemen at a school, and I think the power is like, like there's a group of offensive linemen. This one's public, but the offensive linemen at Arkansas basically signed a deal together to be like, to have a barbecue joint, and they signed this deal. So like, there's probably power in numbers, right? I didn't think you could do, like, again, the same question you asked me earlier. Like, I didn't think the Miami deal was legal because I just didn't think the purpose was you could just be on a football team and you've gotten money. Like there had to be something you did. I just didn't assume that. So maybe being an offensive lineman at Arkansas, I don't know, maybe that's also paid for play, but people are stretching these rules. So group licensing deals, I think, and this, I meant to tell you this earlier, like I don't think necessarily like the backup offensive tackle at Nebraska has that much marketability, right? But like, I don't know if he does a deal with all the offensive linemen. Yeah, it's probably a good deal there. There's probably a deal to be had.
It's definitely interesting times ahead. But Dan, thank you very much. Definitely appreciate your time. And before we wrap things up, any parting words?
No, if you're interested in this NIL space, definitely follow me. I'm at Sports Law Lust, and my podcast, Conduct Detrimental. We do all things sports and law. And then, if you're really interested in NIL, conductdetrimental.com, our website. People put up NIL articles basically every day. It's a lot of high school. There's a lot of buzz now in the high school athletes now cashing in NIL. You and I don't have time to talk about it, but we have probably about 6 articles on the site with people talking about Mikey Williams and Quinn Howard. I think it's Ewers. I haven't heard someone say it, but he's the hot football player. So, yeah. All good, but yeah, that's where to find me. But yeah, Sports Law Lust here on Instagram and Twitter.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dan Lust, thank you very much for joining me on the business of NIL. Take care, buddy. Thank you.
My pleasure. Have a good night.
You too.